Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you guys so much for coming back to Give Black, Give Back in Conversations. We have had an illustrious time after our presentation back in August for Black Philanthropy Month. So if you didn't get a chance to watch any of those, please go back to the Community Foundation website and take a look at those. We had some really great speakers. Today, with no less, we have Dr. Kelly Miller-Smith. He is of the First Baptist Capitol Hill here in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's going to share some really great information. But for those of you who are coming back, just remember that Give Black, Give Back has three purposes specifically. And first of all is to raise the awareness of Black philanthropy, not only in Nashville, but also nationally as well. We also want to support Black philanthropists. So if you're interested in being a philanthropist or you have a philanthropy story, we are capturing those stories on our Give Black, blackgivingback.com site. So if you can go to that and find places to leave your story. And then our third initiative is to really make sure that Black-led nonprofits get access to funding, whether or not they do it through Black-led foundations or how that works. We want to support them as well. So we have that three-pronged process. So if you're watching this or whatever you're watching, please like, share, comment. We want to definitely get your information. We have people behind the scenes who can feed us questions. We have our conversation here with Reverend Smith, but we definitely want to get your feedback. So please like, share or comment as well. So I'm going to hop right into it. So today we have Dr. Kelly Miller-Smith. He is the pastor at First Baptist Capitol Hill here in Nashville, Tennessee. He has had many assignments. He's been very active in the community. His family is active in the community as well, as far as the Black community through his civil rights. So we're going to get some really good information and some good stories. So you guys have notes ready and all these different people that I'm sure he's going to share. You should Google them if you don't know them, because they will all be important and how we're moving forward. So we're going to get his perspective on how things are going right now, and also things in the past that have gone as well. So Reverend Smith, welcome so much to Give Black, Give Back Conversations. Eric and I are very happy to have you on the conversation.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Good. I'm going to let Eric Brown, who is also part of our advisory board of Give Black, Give Back, so to pitch the first question, and then we'll kind of go back and forth.
Thank you, Lisa. Pastor, Pastor, my first question really is to ask you is about what is your philanthropic origin story, or when was really your first experience being connected to philanthropy?
Well, it really starts in my context, in the context of the church, because of the fact that, even as we call the giving within the context of churches, tithing, it is really about philanthropy as well, because of the fact that we give out of the resources that we have available for ourselves. Anything that moves beyond, not anything, but many things that move beyond what we're doing for ourselves personally, but what we're doing on behalf of others is where the story started. And really, it began to catch on with me when I was probably working on my master's program, when I realized that how important it is. And I had been the beneficiary of, others' philanthropic efforts with an organization that I was working with there in Atlanta, and which was during the time that they were having the missing and murdered children's crisis. And so that was an organization that sprung up, of which I was a part of, and our responsibility was to go over into the communities and to establish community programs and helping people to get engaged in activities that will will hopefully keep them safe and other kind of things. And there were several entities around the city of Atlanta that would give, and part of my responsibility was to get on the phone, call them up and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Can you help us? Also to find churches that would partner with us in other kinds of ways. And so looking at that and that kind of effort caused me to realize that, those things are important. And each of the churches that I have, or at least the latter two churches that I have pastored, we've also tried to make sure they understand the importance of going beyond what we do for ourselves so that we don't see each of our churches or the church as being a maintenance organization. Unfortunately, too many churches are like that. They do whatever they can do to maintain themselves, put the rest of the money in the bank and sit on it, whereas within our congregations, the one in Knoxville as well as the one here in Nashville, we've committed ourselves to making sure that we're doing things beyond ourselves, that we help, HBCUs, we help other organizations with their effort. As a matter of fact, we've committed at least 10% of our budget to make sure that we are helping others beyond who we are and what we are about.
Thank you.
That is outstanding. First of all, I give you accolades from that standpoint. And I kind of just want to, jump right into that, where you're talking about the church and it's also philanthropy. And as you mentioned before, we give a statistic all the time that, African Americans are the most philanthropic group in America, by far demographically. And that number rings to about $11 billion a year. On average, African Americans give 25% more than their white household counterparts than their income. And even though with the wealth gap, where we don't, as a group community, don't have as much to give, we give significantly more. And so the conversation around stewardship and philanthropy, how do you sort of relate that? Like, how do you define the difference between stewardship and philanthropy, given, the conversation we just had, specifically, or your comments around how your church does it?
I think they run parallel with each other, and sometimes they really are synonymous with one another because of the fact when we talk about stewardship, we're talking about how we manage our resources. And when we talk about philanthropy, we're talking about also how we manage those resources, just in a different kind of way. So philanthropy is an outgrowth of what we do in terms of our own stewardship. And so when we find ourselves being good stewards, then we also find ourselves having the space and finding the space to make sure that we're helping others beyond ourselves. So it's very important for us to understand that, we don't look to have the kind of story whereby people have mismanaged their funds, even if they're given to good causes, and then they themselves find the need to have to be the beneficiaries of what it is that other organizations are doing. Though I'm not suggesting that a person ought not to give over and beyond what they may give to other entities, but at the same time, if they're good stewards, then therefore they're going to manage what they need to do for themselves, and then shift and do what they need to do for others. Stewardship also involves not just the finances and the resources, but also how we handle our energy and our personal power and capacity. And so we nice little catchy way in which we phrase it as saying our time, our talents, and our treasures. And so all of that is involved in our stewardship. And also really because when you think of working with philanthropic kinds of organizations, we understand that they not only need the resources, but they also need human beings. They need people who are going to be able to stand and to work and to volunteer. And in my thinking, that also is a part of that same thing. Now, obviously, you need the dollars, but you also need the human power that's going to make sure that people do it. And it's interesting. I've worked with many not-for-profit organizations, and it's always exciting. We have persons who have great expertise in their own specific professions, but here they are sitting on these boards or sitting as part of these advisory committees and sharing that same level of expertise and connection and influence. And those are the kind of things that really make a difference within the giving community and demonstrates that a city or community can have compassion. And that's really where it goes.
Awesome.
One of the first times I met you, Pastor, you preached a sermon at American Baptist College chapel. where one of my mentors, Dr. Forrest Harris, talked a lot about your father and the influence that he had on his life. I really just wanted to hear more from you about not only philanthropy, but just the legacy that you already have, not only from your father, but also the church in general and the civil rights movement.
Well, it's humbling when I think about the contributions that my dad had made here in the city of Nashville, and the influence that it had in Nashville. And a lot of people, even to this day, still have great respect for the kind of work that he had done, and the impact that he's had in so many different ways. His name, well, in Nashville, there are many people who still remember and know who he was, does not carry the same kind of weight on a national level, even though, people began to realize. I think it was Jim Lawson who helped us to see last year at the funeral of John Lewis, to remind people that, John Lewis may not have been as engaged and involved in the civil rights movement, at least initiated into it, if it had not been for him being a student of my father. And my father said, "John, you need to go down here to this meeting." And John didn't know anything about the meeting, except as my father had told him. And that when they went to the meeting and found out what was going on with the sit-ins, that was the impetus that got John Lewis involved. And then the rest is a part of his history. And so that also points out to us that sometimes it is not always the big things, and it's not the Martin Luther King level stuff. And what King did is extremely significant. So I'm not minimizing what he did, because he helped galvanize a nation at a time when it needed to be. I was just watching, this is divergent a little bit, watching a documentary about King just recently, and just continues to demonstrate how profound he was. So he was a very important entity, but then there was also many other persons who worked in other corridors and worked in other contexts, such as Nashville. King had a high praise for Nashville because of what my father and others were doing as a part of the movement effort here, the influence that they had, the ways in which they were able to train and to nurture the students so that they can make sure this was an effective movement. Many of us have seen the tapes of what happened when they did try to go down there and do things peacefully, and yet they stuck with the game plan. And when they stick with the game plan, then it makes a difference in terms of how others are able to see it. So it took persons like my dad, like Andrew White, who was an AME preacher here in Nashville, others who were here. Fred Cloud was one of those in the later generation. Bill Barnes was another one that was part of that. There were several, Marcel Keller, many persons who were here that were engaged in what was going on in their efforts, just doing. And the interesting thing that I thought about, particularly a lot over the past couple of years, is even as we celebrate the John Lewises, and we celebrate the C.T. Vivians, and we celebrate even the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and the Andy Youngs and others, at the time when they were doing what they were doing, they were not popular beyond those cadre of people, those people who were engaged in the movement. If you read the press of what was going on back then, you realize that the press was fairly negative, or they theoretically were trying to be neutral, but they had editorials that were talking negatively about what they were doing, and the fact that they, when King wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail, it was a response to clergy persons who were saying that, you're just coming here to disrupt and to create issues. And you read those sort of things. And we're grateful that there's a different era now that's willing to, honor John Lewis by naming a street after him and doing other kind of things. But, when they were doing what they were doing, my dad and others, it was not a celebratory sort of thing. It was not a high moment. It was not like Jesus coming into the city of Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday. These were very tough times. I remember them very clearly. I remember the times when people threatened to blow up our house. And so we had to get up in the middle of the night and go out to another community while they searched to see if there were bombs there. I remember, seeing on TV when the rocks were being thrown at demonstrators and they were running back to the church building, First Baptist Church, because of the fact that that was their place where they can find refuge. And so, when we see those things, these are, we may, right now, but to live those days was even worse than what it is that we see now. So, they do need to be celebrated. They need to be honored. But we have to also remember that they were not always a part of the public appeal, and yet they persevered. And part of what we tell and need to tell generations now, among the things I tell people when they have a chance is you need to find a mentor. You need to find somebody who's going to talk with you and help you to understand what works, what does not work in principle. You may have a different kind of passion, you may have a different kind of energy, but you need to talk with somebody who's been down these roads so that your energy is not going to be like a soda pop that you shake up and it fizzes for a moment, then after a while it settles down, eventually goes flat. And so it's important for persons to have those others that they can talk with privately or publicly, whatever the case may be, so they can hear and know. And my dad and others did that as well. They trusted and had conversations with others who had been down similar kinds of roads. They're not always persons who get to the headlines, but they're persons who've been helpful to them.
So, I just want to say from here, I am taking notes on people that I either don't know or, you named off quite a few people that I was like, I need to Google them. Like I told you guys when we first started, you're going to be taking notes. And so, slow the tape down or whatever you need to do. But there's a lot of really good nudges. So first of all, thank you for sharing that information and the true history of exactly what happened, not the sort of cleaned up version of that we see, on the television or whatever, because I think that's extremely important. And that's what we try to give, Black philanthropists, like what is the value of a Black philanthropist? What is the value of a Black-led nonprofit? And those people, were behind the scenes, to your point, all these names that you mentioned and, like that were pivotal to actually be here. So like sometimes we want you mentioned before that we're used to seeing the glamorized version of it was all fun. And your stories of like, no, that was definitely not the case from that standpoint. So I know you mentioned a lot of names in particular of people that you mentioned, all the names on here. Was there anybody in Nashville in particular, like were there allies as well, people who were not from the community that you could also highlight, or you feel like, people have maybe forgotten their contribution to, activism and also the First Baptist Church of Capitol Hill?
Well, there were several persons, that, and some of them are fairly well respected in terms of names. And it's really, like James Bevel, who worked along with others, with John Lewis. You had Bernard Lafayette, who was engaged and involved. Obviously, Diane Nash, who did her iconic thing on the steps of City Hall. You have Julius Scruggs, who was also engaged and involved in what was going on there. You have others who have been on the forefront. Some have died in the past year or so. Leo Lillard was one. So there are those persons, and sometimes it's not always the persons who are the spokespersons. It's the warm bodies that you're able to bring there. We were talking about philanthropy. One of the interesting things I remember my father saying is that it was an interesting set of dynamics that happened when they were boycotting the stores downtown, because even though these husbands were the store owners down there, their wives were calling into the movement saying this, we want to donate some money to help you to break, obviously they don't want to go public with it because they still have to keep some level of peace in their homes. But how it is that there were demonstrators who were demonstrating at Kane Sloan's and the Harveys downtown, and persons who had positions in upper management, but yet that their wives are the ones who are on the phone saying, listen, we want to support your movement because we believe in what you're doing. And so you had a lot of that was going on where people were being supportive of that, but yet did not need or want or desire their names. Even within the own African-American community, I've listened to the stories of some of the members, persons who have been members of First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, where they were talking about the fact that, they helped with the bail the students out of jail. They helped with food, they helped with transportation, they helped with, whenever there were other things like the sessions, the classes that were there, they facilitated those sort of things. So there were a lot of ways in which people helped to make sure that it was effective. So it wasn't just the students that were going downtown and getting their heads beat in, but it was also those persons who found themselves engaged in helping in ways. And therefore, even if you're not all into, because you see, there's still those liabilities of what would happen if people were to be known to give, but yet they still wanted to be supportive. And you don't mind silent partners as long as they're silent in the right kinds of ways. And that is what is important. Not everybody wants their name in the headlines, but they may want to be able to be identified, at least in their own consciousness, that I'm doing the right thing for the right reason.
That is so true, and that's what we, philanthropy is a very unique way to be. There's an article that I recently authored, is like, a protest like a philanthropist, and it specifically talks about like some of the things like that. Thank you for sharing that and highlighting that, of you can protest and like a philanthropist. And that's how you explained exactly what the entire piece is about, is that there's so many ways that a philanthropist can be a philanthropist and still be a part, but not necessarily, maybe they don't make the contribution and make it to the, to the stage, but they definitely help people to sort of get there. So Eric, I know you have a question, so I want to give you an opportunity to go as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Pastor. Going into that, as well as a little earlier, you talked about some of the activism that you did in Atlanta. I wanted to go a little deeper in that, knowing that you are a HBCU man as well. Love the HBCUs. Going to Morehouse, I just wanted to know more about how much did Morehouse College play into your ministry as well as your activism as well?
Well, Morehouse College plays into larger than just a ministry in and of itself, but in terms of the whole male psychic. They start from day one reminding us that we're men, and that so when you come to Morehouse, you're not a Morehouse student, you're a Morehouse man. And and then the kind of other things that they remind you of, and the people that they bring before us. At the time I went to Morehouse, Martin Luther King had already been assassinated. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that when we went down for the funeral of Dr. King, we drove by the campus of Morehouse, and my father looked over and pointed to one of the dormitories on Morehouse's campus, which is called Graves Hall. He said, "That's where you'd be staying as a freshman." And that was the only time I recall him ever saying anything about where he would like to see me go to college. But I remembered that, and the only school I applied to was Morehouse. I only got in by the skin of my teeth and only got out by the skin of my teeth. but I was able to get there. And a footnote to that, I did not stay in that dorm. I stayed in another one, but that one used to be the freshman dorm there on Morehouse's campus. But Morehouse creates a kind of thought pattern that reminds you of the importance not only of doing things within our own community, but how does it impact the larger community as well? You don't lose your identity, you don't lose your connection just because you are engaging in the broader community, but you still are wholly and fully who you are excuse me, and by being wholly and fully who you are, wholly, WHOLLY, that then therefore you bring an authenticity as to who you are and what you bring to the situation. And it's unfortunate, that we're having to try to get society, even to this day, to that point of understanding that if I come in there with all of my Blackness, whatever that may mean, whether it's in my hair, whether it's in my dress, whether it's in my lingo, and that does not mean that I cannot be a person who's fully engaged in what it is that we're trying to accomplish. That doesn't mean that I'm going to compromise the mission of what it is that we do, simply because of the fact I'm coming in whatever I identify as my Blackness. And, and we also have to help them to understand that there is no monolithic way of which Black people are. We don't all talk the same way. We don't all, dress the same. We don't have the same kind of interests. We don't like the same teams. We don't even like all like the same persons who are identified in some context as being the African-American leaders. And that's okay. Because, with our uniqueness, we still bring a kind of diversity around the table. So it is, the genesis for me started in my home because of the fact, it was just live and vibrant. Many of the persons that, again, the people celebrate now, we knew as friends of my dad. I didn't think of them as being celebrities. I thought of them as being somebody who's helping to fight for a cause. So it started at that level. Went on to Morehouse, and there we were exposed to people. I remember when Maynard Jackson first came and spoke at Morehouse. We were sitting there in Sale Hall Chapel, and so coincidentally, I was sitting next to, I guess, one of his staff persons who was following his speech, and I was watching as she was striking through the things he did not say, so that they can have that record of what it is. So there are things that we were seeing. Muhammad Ali came to our school while I was a student there at Morehouse, and so there were a lot of things that we were just exposed to simply because of the fact of where we were. And Julian Bond, I knew him from when I was a student at Morehouse, and then later on, even while I was a student at ITC. So there are people that you just meet and brush shoulders with and are exposed to. And that's part of the uniqueness of African-American colleges, historical Black colleges and universities, and those kinds of experiences. Now, sure, they are coming onto the campuses and these white institutions. Vanderbilt does a lot of it, and hires them and invites them to come to speak in those contexts. But there's something that's special, a different kind of specialness when they come to these HBCUs and they're able to do what they do. We were a part, when I went back for my master's, to help not only when Maynard Jackson was running for mayor, we were part of that movement, part of that effort there. He was first Black mayor of the city of Atlanta. Then when Andy Young came back later and ran for mayor. So there were those political things that we were doing as well.
That is, we have a lot in common. I didn't know that until you were having this conversation, which is why these conversations are really, really important. I think you mentioned the differences between all of us, and that is true. We all have our own, idiosyncrasies. There are things that are classic to us. I also spent some time in Atlanta as well. And so Maynard Jackson and Andrew Young are obviously people that I looked up to in that space. As far as, being in that particular area. So, and just a lot of different things. So I hope that hope people who are watching this are realizing that that we all have a lot of commonalities. If we're in this fight, there's a lot of us, but not as many, doing this. And so when you start to share with people, and this is what this is about, is having these conversations, so they get to know you, they get to know your father, they get to know the church and the role. And so that we are more cohesive in the approach that we take, whether or not we take different ways of getting there, that we're cohesive in how in our goal, in what the purpose is, and so how we connect. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to share something that I was able to do a little bit of research on you. There's a lot of really good information about Reverend Smith. So I would suggest that anybody who is interested, We could spend hours talking to him, so we don't want to do that, but you can Google him and you can get some information. But I did want to find one piece I thought was really interesting. At the Martin Luther King Jr. Institute of Research and Education at Stanford, they noted that your father was listed as a social gospel minister. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an interesting title, and I was like, what do you, and that's their interpretation, what do you believe is the legacy of First Baptist Capitol Hill?
Well, it's interesting when they use that phrase, different eras had different understandings as to what that social gospel means. Around the turn of the last century, not just current century, but around 1900s, there was a social gospel movement, but that was more so trying to create a kind of conservatism in terms of their own approach to religion and other kinds of things, even though there were some good, strong voices that were part of that movement. I think my father would have preferred to be referred to as a social justice minister over against social gospel because of the fact that he believed that the whole business of social justice is very strongly rooted in the biblical word, Old Testament and New Testament. And in his book, in my father's book that he wrote, which is entitled Social Crisis Preaching, and that he refers to the fact that any authentic preaching is going to involve addressing issues of social crisis and social justice. He referred to Martin Luther King Jr., and he tries to correct the understanding of what people have about Martin Luther King Jr., because they like to refer to him as a civil rights leader. And in reality, even as that's the label they like to place on him, in reality, he was a minister of the gospel, because Martin Luther King Jr. was doing what it is God needed him to do. So he was not just motivated because of the injustices that were being experienced in 1950s around the bus boycott and other kind of things. He was doing what God had asked him to do and what God was appointing him to do and anointing him to do. And those are the kind of things that get you into trouble, because of the fact that, you're not following a populist movement. You're not trying to create one. You're creating an obedience to what God has asked you to do and how God has asked you to speak out. When King spoke out against the war in Vietnam, he, prior to that, had a good, cozy relationship with Lyndon Johnson and the Johnson administration because of the Civil Rights Bill, because of the Voting Rights Bill, and the other things that they were able to do. But when he spoke out against the war in Vietnam, because he's doing what God asked him to do, then he ran across the White House and ran across Lyndon Johnson and others. And that's when J. Edgar Hoover and others felt that they need to heighten what they were doing in terms of trying to discredit Martin Luther King. So ministers who are truly engaged in what they're called to do will find themselves also engaged in social justice issues. I don't know what a lot of these, particularly the majority community preachers, see themselves doing, particularly when they align themselves with a Donald Trump, when they align themselves with this conservative white movement and feel as if this is the right thing. That is not about Jesus Christ. It is not about the Bible. It is not about what, at least my interpretation, and I don't see how they can see it any differently, because the whole Old Testament is about liberation of the people that believed and understood themselves to be the chosen people of God, and running against social justice issues, about them being enslaved, about them being harassed by those that are identified as their enemies, and other kinds of things that are there. Yes, they were dealing with their own sin as well, but they were also dealing with the issues of the communities around them. Jesus very clearly was dealing with this as well. And so, and my father tapped into that and understood that. And so when he preached his own social crisis messages, and almost every sermon, there was something in there that was connected to what was going on in the world, in the community around them, and as well as dealing with our own sin and own issues. So he would see himself more as not just a social gospel preacher, but one who's a social justice, if we're trying to find justice in this day and time.
Awesome. Thank you for sort of clarifying that. Again, this is part of this platform is to correct some stories and to sort of get the perspective. A lot of times our vision, and I say our African Americans or Black Americans vision is sometimes, and I think the intent was there, but to your point of using words mean something. Words always matter. And so that twist, and hopefully people can sort of, kind of engage in that way. So thank you for sort of clarifying that for us. Eric, do you have any questions, or do you have a next question?
Yeah, I do. One reason that I really love being a part of Give Black, Give Back, when it was explained to me by Kia Jarman, was the fact of definitely really honing in on what philanthropy is. I think a lot of people always think that philanthropy is people that are millionaires, billionaires that give, and not necessarily thinking about the $1 to $2 that really gets things moving, and really is the majority of is the lifeblood of most organizations. I say that with the thought of philanthropy and also for yourself. We've talked about the legacy of your father, but what would you also like your legacy to be, as far as not only within philanthropy, but also just for yourself and for the rest of your community?
Part of what I would like for others to see and to know about me when I'm dead and gone, or old and decrepit, older and more decrepit, is that I did have compassion for people. That I tried to help people to work through things and to work toward things. When I came back here to Nashville at the church, that there was some internal things that I needed to address immediately to try to help the church get to the place where it can continue to function as a church needs to function. We've turned the corner from those internal things and have begun to be very, very intentional about what we do beyond our congregation. So we do things, we have a mission project on the continent of Africa. We have things that we do. We share in the Room in the Inn program here in Nashville. So we have, except during the time of the pandemic, but prior to that we've involved housing men in our building, each week, as a part of our doing things that are demonstrating the fact that we care for people. And part of the difference, which is what the whole philanthropic movement is about, is demonstrating to others that you care for them. Now, there are those who give just because of the fact they've got to find a good tax shelter. I don't have any problems with them finding a tax shelter in what they do, what they give to the church. Anybody who wants to give to the church, you're welcome to do that. But there are those who just decided that they've got means that they can make a positive and constructive difference in the lives of others. And that is where their heart, that is where their passion may be. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization in Nashville that is called, and I'm thinking it's still in existence, called OIC, Opportunities Industrialization Center. That it was started by a man up in Philadelphia. His name's Leon Sullivan. And my father went to Philadelphia and was a part of a conversation with several other persons who would go back to their various communities and establish those organizations in their communities. So the Nashville OIC was established by my dad, and where it was designed to train people to know how to do jobs, even if it's just basic training. But part of the challenge that, as Leon Sullivan discovered, was the fact that people had job openings, but they didn't have people who had the skill set to be able to work these jobs. And so he says, hey, so we'll start a training center. We'll start doing those things. The reason why I bring that up is because unless you have been a part of the framework of OIC, many people would not know that Bernard Worthen Sr. and Jr., the ones with the Worthen Bag company over there on Rosa Parks, what was Worthen Bag, now it's Worthen something condominiums, but they were strong supporters of OIC up until the point that Bernard Worthen Jr. passed a couple of years ago, and that they believed very much in what the work was there and support that was necessary to provide the finances, the resources for that. So there are a lot of people who've found their passion through what they can do philanthropically, and it makes a difference when there are those who can find. Not everybody's not going to be happy about everything, but there could be something that really rings their bell. Many other persons who we found. That's why organizations were established, so they can facilitate and help others in that regard.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sort of sharing that from that standpoint. So, we could definitely talk to you all day and get a lot of good information. I hope, I know you mentioned your father has a book, and I want to make sure that if you have a book as well, or we can prompt you to get a book, then we want to get you to capture some of this information out there and share that. One of the things in particular, I know you mentioned OIC is specifically as a local organization, and you also have a connection to the Community Foundation of Tennessee as well. Tell us about how that started, your relationship with the Community Foundation locally at the church or through your father.
Right. Well, I was part of the Community Foundation over in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I was simply asked to come and to serve on the board, and we did that. And they had a very strong, and I'm assuming it's still very strong organization there, where they were able to facilitate the helping of many, many different organizations there. And so that was one of the exciting things that I had done in terms of serving on that board. It was nice in a peculiar kind of way to sit on a board where you're not necessarily asking people for money, but you're able to distribute money and to help people and help various kinds of organizations. So that was a good thing for me to be able to do. Here in Nashville, I've not had as many opportunities to serve on boards such as like the Community Foundation, but I have served on other boards of organizations that have worked to help engage people and engage activities in the community.
Perfect. Cool. Eric, I want to pitch you the last question, and then we'll let Reverend Smith sort of share anything that he's doing right now and other things that we can share about. So I'll let you go with that.
Thank you. I only have one last question. It's very simple. Why do you think organizations like Give Black, Give Back are important?
I think it's extremely important. Among the things that many persons who were engaged in the work of civil rights in past as well as present will confess to, use the word confession in quotes, is that desegregation to some degree, to a great degree, crippled many organizations within the Black community. It crippled many of our schools. It crippled businesses and other kinds of things. And it was one of those catch-22 situations where you realize that we want to be engaged, want to be involved in the large community. We wish that it was not at the expense because we could not sustain what we were doing, what we were about, if we just kept everything within our own community without reaching across there. And so there was something that we knew that, and I say we, meaning the Black community, knew was going to get lost. And it's unfortunate that the things that have suffered most are, HBCUs, Black businesses, Black banks, Black retailers, and others that have had that sort of thing. So part of what I'm hoping that people will be able to see and understand is that these institutions are still extremely viable, and that when we give to support those organizations, and particularly when people of color give, part of the argument that many whites and majority of the community people part of what they see and they ask for and they're looking for is to see if people who are being affected, positively affected by these organizations are also giving. So that if I am a part of a board of an institution, of an African-American institution, they want to see if I also am giving, because they don't want it to be that, they're always the ones giving and we're the ones making the decisions, but they want to also see that we're giving, and so that we are demonstrating the fact that we are supportive, not only in terms of our opinions as to what's going to happen, but also in terms of our finances as well. And, because everybody has an opinion about everything. But, you put your money where your mouth is. And when you do that, then you find yourself engaged in trying to help. And so there are organizations and things that I support because even though I don't always have a say so in them, but I want to demonstrate my support because of the fact that I believe it is important. And there are some cancer drives that I support. There's some HBCUs that I support. There are other entities that because I want it to be said that Kelly Smith's name is listed among those, that even if I do it anonymously, but that at least in spirit, that I am the one that I'm being supportive of what it is. So we've got to support. And if we don't do that, then more institutions and more organizations are going to die. Our HBCUs here in Nashville have had challenges, American Baptist College as well as Fisk. I pray that both of them are working their way back up. Tennessee State has had a different set of problems, even though it is a state land grant college. But it is important. We give to all of our HBC. First Baptist does. We put in our budget. We say we want to give to all of them in some shape, form, or fashion. We do it every year. And they don't even know the money's coming. They haven't asked for anything, but they may have, but our intent is to do right because we believe it is right.
That is amazing. So, those types of stories are the stories that we're trying to capture on blackgivingback.com. And so if you guys have stories like this, we want to share those because I think you're right. I think, when we're out in the community, like financially, how are we supporting organizations and supporting our own? And then other people are willing to contribute. You have to sort of lead by example and not lead by opinion, right? So I love that you sort of kind of said that in particular. There's so many notes that I've taken as far as people I need to go Google and find out about, things that I need to, just get a better understanding of. I did not know that there was a social gospel movement. That was the first time I'd ever seen that. So I will definitely, kind of go with that. And I hope everyone is watching this or listening to this will take the time to sort of educate yourself. Reverend Kelly Miller Smith has been an extreme blessing and honor to have you on and sort of have this conversation around it. So I want to give you, a couple of minutes to sort of share what's going on there at, First Baptist Capitol Hill. What are you doing right now? What do you need support with? Because you and your organization and your church have given so much to the community. And one of the ways that we always want to make sure that we're supporting, the community is what are you working on? What are you doing? How can we support you? And then from there.
I am grateful, again, in the 11 years I've been at First Baptist, that we've been able to turn the corner on some things. I mean, it is no secret that we had challenges in terms of our building for a few years prior to my coming. And we've been able to take care of that and some other things that were heavy burdens on us. Now we are being very keenly focused on doing things that we can do. Among them, how do we help those persons who are experiencing homelessness? How do we help some of the public schools here? So we have adopted Robert Churchwell School. We've also adopted another school here in the city of Nashville that we financially support. How do we help students who are going through these HBCUs? What sort of things? Because most of them, go there, end up in a lot of debt. And so how can we help them? So we try to, again, help in terms of what our financial ways of doing it. So I have some members who have come to talk with me, again, specifically about what can we do as a congregation to help those who are homeless, and that there has to be some effort. The city should do some things. No one's trying to take the city or the state off the hook or the nation off the hook. But also we as a church need to find ways in which we can minister to them. So that's part of what I'm trying to work and to wrestle with in a way that's going to have a positive impact in terms of that community.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. Eric, is always a blessing and an opportunity to work with you. Kia Jarman, my co-conspirator in Give Black, Give Back. She's out there doing some great things as well. So I'm Lisa Swift Young, and we want to again thank Dr. Kelly Miller Smith Jr. And sharing this information. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, you can obviously reach out to the church, and Reverend Smith has said he feels fine if you want to do it for tax purposes. They will happily accept and go with that, and they will serve the community accordingly. So please make sure you do that. If you're looking for a church home, I'm sure that they will be more than welcome arms to. Are you back virtual? Are you physical?
We're doing both. We're
Okay.
doing virtual and we're doing in person. Obviously, when you come in person, we ask that you wear your mask and practice social distancing. We hope. Let me say two things. Let me say two last things. One is let's everyone try to get vaccinated. It is just so important, so crucial. We would have been out of this level of the crisis if people had gotten vaccinated at the beginning of the year. If we just gone on and pushed it toward 80, 90, 100% of the people. But because of all this rebellion in there, we find these waves keep coming back and back again. So I do encourage you to consider getting vaccinated. I know that there are people who have other kinds of objections, and I understand if you have a religious objection to it based on your faith, then I can respect that. And I respect whatever the person's decision is, but let me just strongly encourage you to do that. Secondly, when we talk about philanthropy, in that I do recall that right after the tornado came through here last March a year ago, that there was a couple that wanted to make sure that they can make a positive impact. And they used us as the vehicle to help others. They said, listen, we trust you in what you do and how you do your ministry. And so we're sending you these very generous, and all donations are generous, but large amounts, and put it that way, of money, and so that we can handle. And so we did several different things that was able to help persons in the community because of the fact that people, and they really designated. They just said, I want you to use this to help others in the community. And we enjoy those opportunities as well.
Perfect. So another great reason, another way that you can give. So if you're a philanthropist, and everyone who is giving is a philanthropist, and that's like, to your point, it doesn't have to be big amounts. I think Eric mentioned that earlier. It can be, your time, talent, and treasures, but we're also looking for finances as far as philanthropy is concerned. So again, thank you again, Reverend Smith, for sort of sharing your knowledge with us. Please, everyone, hopefully take notes and look up all these different icons that are out there that maybe you don't know, and get educated about how philanthropy can truly impact the community and make the changes that we want. Behind the scenes, I would be not remiss in first of all thanking the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee for sort of hosting us for this particular talk and our conversations. And please go back and check any other ones. We've been at this for quite a while. We have a wealth of information. In this day of technology, you don't have to read it. You can listen to it in your podcast. You can watch it. We try to make it available for everybody, anybody to sort of get knowledgeable and have that information. Kia Jarman and I are definitely, leaders in that particular place, but we're always looking for more. Eric Brown, who is on our advisory board, we want to thank you again. Behind the scenes, we have Audra Cox, which we would not be able to do any of this stuff without her. She is, our soldier, again, behind the scenes. You talk about somebody who's behind the scenes and making stuff happen. Audra, that is her title. That should be her title there at the Community Foundation and in the community. Also, Kelly Wahlberg in the background, the communications VP over at the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. We want to thank her for all of her support and always consistently being an ally and creating opportunities for us to sort sort of have this space as well. So all the work that's done there. So remember, if you're interested in giving, there are more than 40 organizations that are Black-led foundations that are posted on the blackgivingback.com website. If you go to those, you can see those, you can read your stories, you can add your stories. If you want to contribute to one of those funds, you can find those funds there and contribute directly. If you don't know exactly what to do and you're overwhelmed, then the Black Giving Back actually is a fund. So you can also contribute to that fund if you want to make a contribution. We also want to, make sure that you are doing those types of things if you're looking for opportunities to give in the community. Reverend Smith has obviously a multitude of things. I'm sure he would be happy to sort of use your resources as far as physical resources to do as well. So thank you everybody for joining us for another conversation of Black Giving Back. Please make sure you subscribe and like and, comment. We'll get back to you. You can reach out to us. I'm sure there's links in the chat that you can follow and find. So thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to speak with us today. And we'll see you next time.